Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined, as always, by Britain's best guitar player, Eric Clapton. I take that back. Though you do look like Eric Clapton a bit today, and I don't know what it is. Jason Johnston yelling.
I think it's the red eye in from Seattle that has helped me look like Eric Clapton this day.
Oh, right. The red eye.
Are you talking about like the young, hip Eric Clapton? Are you talking the old, like, I could tell by your smile
I'll let you do the
exactly
math.
which one
I'll just
you're
let you do the
referring to. Grey-haired, wrinkly,
getting warmer.
stubbly
Getting warmer.
Eric Clapton.
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll
thanks.
get hot.
That's good. Yeah. Cheers. It's good to be here. Always a pleasure.
So how many hours of sleep are you working on right now?
I don't know. I'd say modern aircraft. Who thought it was a good idea to have people sit on ironing boards? Like it's like an unopened ironing board. I think it every time I sit in these modern seats. I'm like, yeah, those old seats far too cushiony. You know, your butt would hurt after 4 hours. Let's cut that down. Let's get a sore butt after 40 minutes. So let's do it that way.
Is this a complaint of someone who just rides in airplanes, or is this a complaint from a tall person? Like, is this a tall person's complaint?
No.
You don't think
so? This is okay. See, the next time you stay in a hotel, just get comfy on the ironing board. And just tell me how it feels.
But I'm thinking about how your legs fit in, when you sit down, because you've got longer legs, and your knees are going to get close to the chair in front of you, so you kind of push back a bit harder against the chair. So I'm not defending airplane chairs here. I understand they're uncomfortable. My question is, I wonder if you feel it a bit more just being a bit lankier than others. That's all. Yeah.
I don't think so. I think no matter what height you are, I think the seats are just wildly uncomfortable. But, and here's where I'm going to take it up a notch.
All right.
The same is true for first class. First class isn't as comfortable as it used to be either.
No, it's not. It's not. Well,
right?
First class.
Those seats are like the old seats.
First class domestic within the U.S.
Oh, hopeless.
Now,
not worth your time.
Granted, I have never flown first class internationally, but I've seen how they live.
Really?
I never have. It's so expensive. I don't have.
I've done it several times.
Shut up. How do you do this, Mr. Disposable Cash? What's going on here?
I don't use all of my miles to take my family on vacation. I use all of my miles to upgrade myself.
There you go. And that's it.
Then I tell my family, no, I'm not a member of any frequent flyer programs. That would make sense, wouldn't it? I should do that. You are correct.
And now I know why you never let Tamara listen to our podcast, our podcast.
Or why we never fly together, because I'm always at the front of the plane. Anyway, yes. So for the listeners, I am just back from a road trip across the United States. I took my two boys and we drove from the eastern coastal state of Virginia, and we drove 3,200 miles to the western coastal state of Washington, and made it all the way to Seattle. And that's where we flew home from last evening. And I kept saying to people, we did a 2-week tour of the United States in 6 days. And
amazing.
Regrets, I've got a few. Spent a wonderful 6 hours at Yellowstone. Those were 6 hours very well spent.
Okay.
Spent an incredible 1 hour at Mount Rushmore. That was a good hour, solid hour. Tell you what's funny about Mount Rushmore. So many people have said, when you get there, it's smaller than you imagine.
Yeah.
And I've heard so many people say that that when I got there, it was bigger than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, that's yeah. Yeah, it's the other, you can always hype something up and then you're let down, but you're expecting the worst and it's not as bad. I like that.
Yeah, this was under promised and over delivered. So
there you go.
Yeah, I looked at it, I was like, that's all right. I tell you though, see, as you're looking at what's his name, Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah,
is that a name?
Roosevelt.
Is that a real thing?
Yeah, Roosevelt.
And Abraham Lincoln.
Yep.
They're on their kind of 90 degrees to one another, maybe less than 90 degrees.
They're looking
to
away
one
from
another.
one another. Yeah.
Well, it looked. I'm just waiting on them leaning in and kissing. Like they're so.
Oh, they're
just
they're
so there.
close. Oh, I thought they were looking away from. No, they're about
It's like
to
they're
kiss.
whispering sweet nothings to each other. Yeah.
Well, they did say
think that
Abraham
would
Lincoln was closeted. Did you know that?
Really?
Yeah,
I did not
a bit
know
of. I don't know how valid this is, but this is one of the rumors that you hear over the years.
Oh boy, boy. Bit like Eric Clapton being high when his child had an accident.
I wasn't trying to put my fingers at you, Jason, by making the Eric
Wow.
Clapton statement. But yeah, but
Wow.
similar to that.
Well-
But I think the Abraham Lincoln one might be more true than the Eric Clapton one.
Or the ghost in the corner in Three Men and a Little Lady, or Three Men and a Baby.
3 Men and a Baby, yeah. He was there with a gun. He was there with a
Or
gun.
the hanging Munchkin in The Wizard of Oz.
Wizard of Oz, that's right.
Like none of those things are true, but maybe the Abraham Lincoln thing is.
I don't think any of this. It's made Abraham Lincoln gayer than he's ever been, which is fantastic.
How did we ever get anywhere? How did this happen?
Uh-huh.
And then just to close this out,
We're not done. We're done talking about Abraham Lincoln potentially being a homosexual.
only because I've never heard it, and I really don't feel like the evidence is there for us to be making this claim on our whiskey podcast. But if it's ever proven to be correct, you heard it here first, listeners. I had the 100th meeting of my whiskey society, my Palouse Whiskey Society, on the evening of August 20, and that was a jolly, jolly good time. That was 10 exquisite pours, and yeah, I'm not going to say too much because we do like to keep the society a wee bit on the DL.
Yeah.
But a bonus pour was an upcoming Single Cask Nation collaboration, and we will have more information on that collaboration. I like saying that. I like the way those words sound. We'll have more information on that future collaboration in a future episode.
I thought you were going to say we'll have more information on the future collaboration in the State of a Nation email.
Moving on.
Oh, that's great. The potential collaboration is escaping my brain right now, but that's just because I'm old.
We just talked about it before we hit the record button. It's the one that you are thinking of, he said, trying to cover your tracks.
Yep.
Yep. 100%. So
know
in
the one
today's
you're talking
episode...
Yes. Yeah. On today's episode,
wink.
you and I have been talking about trying to bring in our dear Jess a bit more, our wonderful Elijah a bit more into the podcast.
Speaking of whom,
Yeah.
he came across the good state of Washington to attend the 100th meeting of the society, and he brought some drams to share as well.
He told me he was going to be seeing you, and I said, hug him hard, hug him like you mean it.
Oh, that's what he was doing. Okay, that makes much more sense. Okay.
He said, I'm going to see
Much
Jason
more
later this afternoon. I said, hug him hard, hug him like you mean it. So we've been wanting to bring in Jess and Elijah a bit more into the podcast, and your trip out to Washington was the perfect excuse to bring Jess into this conversation with Connal Mackenzie and Alex Bruce of Ardnamurchan, and she was a lovely addition. She brought some great insight to the conversation. It was really nice to have her there with us.
Well, and that was certainly the hope when you bring.
which is not a surprise. I need to put that out there. As I was coming out of my mouth, I think I almost sounded as if I was surprised. I was not surprised. I was just pleased by it and wanted to discuss it. Continue. I'm sorry to step over you.
As you and I have been very open about in the podcast, being a two-man show for a long time, even opening the company up to very good people who we know will do tremendous, tremendous work is not easy.
No. Nope.
Right? You have to kind of say, okay, this is a point at which another person can come in and they too can make this their own. And in expanding the podcast a bit, it made me think back to the first time one of us, and I think it was probably you, but I might be misremembering, but one of us went off and did an interview by themselves.
It was me with Richard Urquhart of Gordon MacPhail.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember that.
I wasn't sure if it was Simon Brooking, actually, because I remember you interviewing Simon Brooking by yourself when you were staying in the same inn.
It was the same. You know what this was? So this is the reason why. This was during the Julio's Go Whiskey weekend. And so Richard was in town, Simon was in town. You know, it was Hans Fringa was in town, right? It was just everybody was there, and so so both of those recordings were done solo. Yeah.
Right, and so there was that feeling back then, where we've always done the interviews together. What's going to be different? Not worse, just what's going to be different. And then we came to find out, you going off and doing a solo interview, me going off and doing a solo interview. It's kind of fun. It's a little twist. We come back and we report to the other. And now here's this opportunity, you partnering with Jess on an interview. Okay, what differences will that present?
Yeah.
And I'm excited to listen back to this interview, see where it went, see what Jess asked that you and I wouldn't.
Right.
And I think that, that's one of the comments I just made the other week, I think, when we did the Bill Thomas episode, where I was saying, as much as I was interviewing by myself, I was still thinking, what would Joshua ask at this point? And what are the types of questions Joshua asks? Well, now I'm excited to hear, what are the types of questions that Jess asks? Where does that go within the conversation? So, yeah, I'm excited for this.
Yeah.
I'm eager to hear this.
Well, I definitely had you in my mind with some of my line of questioning, touching on some personal aspects of them. Just a wee bitty. As the question was coming out, I said, you know what, this is something Jason might want to know about. So yeah.
Jason's nosy enough. What would he want to ask at this point?
What I love, I loved the conversation for many reasons. First off, this is the second time that Alex Bruce from Ardnamurchan is on the podcast. He was on during season 2 with Charlie McLean when I was at Malt Stock with them back in 2018. And
a solo interview. Gosh, I've never spoken to Alex Bruce.
No, you haven't, and you never will. And and what I liked about this was not just getting a chance to talk to I almost called him Bruce. It's Alex Bruce. He's got 2 first names. Was not just talking with Alex again, but Connal has been a fan of the podcast for a while now. And it was
brilliant.
it was really cool just being able to talk with someone who had been listening to us for a while. And when he sent over his audio file, it says "One Nation Under Whiskey Padcost." That was the title, which is so perfect. Like, that person is a listener of the podcast if they say Padcost.
That makes me very happy.
Yeah,
very happy.
Yeah, they were good. We learned a lot. We learned a good deal with them.
Cool. Should we jump over? I'm eager to hear this.
Yeah, let's do that. When we come out, we have a little bit of news, but then there's some emails that we've been wanting to bring up. So let's listen to them and then touch on those things. Alex, we've had you on the podcast before. I want to say it was I want to say it was season 2 that we had you. It was you and of course Charlie McLean, and it was for malt stock. And hopefully,
I remember.
Yeah, and so hopefully our listeners recall that episode. You introduced yourself then, but if you wouldn't mind giving our listeners a refresh of who you are and what you do with Adelphi and Ardnamurchan, and then I'd love to hear from Connal as well.
Sure. Thanks, Joshua. Great to be on today. So the last time we spoke, we were at Maltstock in the Netherlands. I'm trying to remember what year was that.
See, this is what's messing with my head. I could have done the research and just gone to the.
I think, from memory, we had a spirit. We didn't have a
Alex,
whiskey.
while you introduce yourself, I'm going to be doing the hard work of researching my own work here.
Fantastic. No, the only reason I asked, it wasn't just to buy time when I tried to remember who I was. It was it was more to try and place it in the history of the company. So anyway, I joined
2018.
back in 2000.
It was 2018.
2018.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So I joined in 2004, so 14 years prior to that. And in those days, Adelphi was an independent bottler. It had been established by Jamie Walker, my predecessor, back in 1992. And it was very, shall we call, niche, I suppose, in terms of independent bottling. Only a handful of casks every year, but each one personally selected for its taste by either Jamie previously or myself, along with Charlie as well, Charlie McLean. And so that's what I inherited, and we built it up. We were very lucky to hit the ground running as single malt. The category of single malt really took off in the first decade of this century. And it got to a stage by 2007 that we had booming sales, but already flatlining supply,
Wow.
which has become, obviously quite common nowadays, as well as the prices going up. We had to make a decision. And I vividly remember a meeting up here in Ardnamurchan with my fellow directors and owners, basically on what direction we take. Do we start filling young casks, with spirit, like other larger independents, or do we potentially buy or build a distillery? And we did have a third option, which cropped up later in the afternoon, which was basically to lock ourselves in the warehouse and just finish off what we had left in stock. that was quite appealing, I have to say it. We ended up deciding to build a distillery here in this lovely remote part of Scotland, the far west, just above the Isle of Mull and just below the Isle of Skye. And I'm actually speaking to you from here today. So you may hear the background noises of distillation and casks rattling their way onto trailers to be pulled up the hill to our top warehouse. That's where we got to. We're now, the distillery opened in 2014, so we are 7 years in, and we are finally selling our own single malt as of the end of last year. And as with all of the changes through the year, the team has expanded, and we have sites both here in Ardnamurchan and down in Fife where we do the bottling and logistics.
So, a quick question regarding the location of Ardnamurchan. Seemingly harder to get to Ardnamurchan than it is to get to Campbelltown. And I'm wondering why that location. What was it logistical? Was it you had land there already and it just made sense, or was there something historical that brought you to that location?
So it certainly wasn't logistical, although it was a reinterpretation of logistics, I suppose, at the end of it. It was quite interesting. You should bring this up today. There was a message on social media from a lorry driver who has just delivered part of the walling for our new warehouses, which are currently under construction up the hill here. And he drove all the way from the south of England in a full Arctic lorry the full length one.
Yeah.
And you can see that the posts he'd been putting on had started somewhere down south on what we know as the M6, one of the largest motorways in the country. And he was stuck there for 5 hours. And yet that paled into insignificance when he finally hit the single track road of Ardnamurchan. And he was, his comments were quite interesting. The simple answer is the land around this area is under the same ownership. Ironically, the actual site for the distillery wasn't that ownership, it was a different owner, but it was selected because of the symbiotic relationship that we have now created with our fellow owner, who owns the farm.
I think that was good to bring our listeners back up to speed on yourself, up to speed on Adelphi and sort of the beginning of Ardnamurchan. But our listeners haven't before heard from Connal Mackenzie. So, Connal, I wonder if you could introduce yourself, talk a bit about what you do with the Adelphi and, of course, with Ardnamurchan as well. And hello and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Joshua and Jess. Yes, hello everyone. So my name is Connal Mackenzie. I am the sales director for Adelphi and Ardnamurchan Distillery. And yeah, I've been in the industry now, I suppose, 5.5 years. But I began my journey here 3 years ago. So yeah, I pretty much manage the sales, do a bit of brand ambassadorial work, and select casks with Alex and the team, and also help put together Ardnamurchan batches from September last year. So yeah, there's a lot to do and a lot going on, and yeah, very much enjoying every single bit of it so far. Started my whiskey journey, I suppose, randomly, not in Scotland. I got into the whiskey industry in New Zealand. I worked for a company called Whiskey Galore, which is a whiskey specialist retail shop distributor importer over there. Yeah. And I worked for Michael Fraser Milne and the team over there.
Are they the same people that do the famous blind tasting every year? They have someone blind taste whiskeys and name them out. Is that the same Whiskey Galore?
Not sure if they. I don't know if they do that, but they do hold, probably in my opinion, one of the best whiskey festivals in the world, called Dram Fest, which is just fantastic. It's one of these sort of biannual just events that take place, and it's got everything from me and a lot of people in regards to people who make the journey. It's testament to how good it is. So actually the next one's due March 22, but hopefully it can go ahead.
Well, it was the last one we went to as well.
It's the last one anyone was at, I think, and we all had to make emergency exits back to the UK. It was that was the last time I was on a flight.
So what brought you down to New Zealand in the first place?
It was the last place I could get a visa to go and work and travel. I had done Canada and Australia, and I just thought I'm just going to just tick New Zealand off the list, and just instantly fell in love with the country. And 6 years later, and a new addition to my wife and I's family, we had a wee baby daughter born in Christchurch. And 18 months after that, we just felt we needed to get home and be with family, because all my family are up here. I live in Nairn now, just outside Inverness, but we're all from the Highlands. So it was just, we had no one really over there. So.
And so did you meet your wife in New Zealand and then brought her back,
no.
or was she from Scotland as well?
No, she's from the Highlands too. So we went over together. Sort of thought we were settling, then had the wee one, and then just got instantly homesick the minute the baby came along. So it was time to bring her back across to the homeland.
Okay, so you left Whiskey Galore, and then you came back and started with Adelphi Ardnamurchan directly thereafter.
Yeah, well, one of the brands that we imported in New Zealand was Adelphi, amongst many other sort of small to medium brands, I suppose. So I was very familiar with Adelphi and Ardnamurchan, and I've met Alex a few times. But no, it wasn't as easy as that. I had to play a round of golf in Araseg and beat him to land the job. So yeah, no, it wasn't as easy as that. So no, it was good. It worked out really well. I think I started in July 2018. So I got home in May. So I managed to make the most of it. I did a wee sort of cheeky tour around Scotland. So I did the Spirit of Speyside. I went down to the Campbellton Malts Festival, and then over for the Festival, and then started in the July. So yeah, it was. And I've been here ever since. Been a pain in your neck ever since, Alex.
No comment.
Wise choice.
So I imagine Jess has a question or two, but you mentioned, Jess, if you don't mind, before I forget, because this is the thing with turning almost 48, is you forget things faster than you ever have. You forget them before you finish the thought that you had in the first place, if that makes sense. Anyway, Connal, you had mentioned you're in charge of putting the batches together, and it got me thinking of Ardnamurchan as it sits in the family of other distilleries that had some sort of consultation with Jim Swan, right? Where it seems the majority of distilleries in modern distilling history that have been working with Jim Swan have a very specific style of distillation and maturation in place, and how they put their batches together or put their whiskeys together. And I feel as if Ardnamurchan is sort of the odd duck out here compared to the other distilleries, because, and you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that your batches tend to be a marriage of your unpeated spirit and your peated spirit. So you're always running two different styles of spirit. Then you marry them in the end to create a mildly peated spirit. And you don't lean on, or I shouldn't say lean on, but you don't incorporate STR casks into your maturation. And so I'm curious if you could talk about the origins of those thought processes as far as putting batches together and not going with the STR, which seems to be sort of a staple with the Jim Swan distilleries.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the blending team, or the tasting team, just consists of Alex, myself, Graham, Mackay, Jenny Carlson, and Antonia Bruce. So we sort of put it together. I'll let Alex talk about more history with Jim Swan. I never had the pleasure of working with him, so I'll let Alex touch bases about that. But what I can tell you about is last year when we put it together last summer, we knew we had the liquid was there. We knew it was ready, but I don't think. And I look back and think, well, we must have had some sort of concept on how it was going to look. But the truth is, we didn't even sort of experiment prior, like just putting things together just to see what things looked at. We didn't really. We knew, we identified hotspots in warehouses. We identified unpeated casks. We knew that there was this crazy couple of rows of PX casks and stuff like that. But I had never actually experimented putting any casks together just as a. And I look back and think, well, why didn't I do that? But we went. I felt we went in going, well, we've got a blank canvas and let's go and paint it. And we literally did. We locked each other into the warehouses for 2 weeks, and we just went to work, and sampled. I can't remember how many hundreds of casks, and took them back and put things together. And we basically went for that 50% unpeated, 50% peated, which is what we do year on year, which we've got that sort of different profiles to work with. So I think that's quite a big advantage. And yeah, just in regards to the STR, we have been fairly traditional. We've filled in first fill bourbon, first fill sherry, both PX and Oloroso. I think it's stood us in good stead, but we're now starting to look at other ways that we can mix Ardnamurchan up. But we wanted to be fairly traditional from the outset, and I think that's the style we've gone for. In regards to the peatiness, yes, it comes from our 30 parts per million, the 6 months a year that we do. However, I do genuinely believe, and I'll let Alex probably talk a bit more about this, but the water that we're using to dilute, so we fill it at 63.5, that's really gloriously peaty water. And that's not the water that's getting cooked up in the stills. That's just a reduction water before we fill into cask. And I genuinely do believe that has an effect on our spirit and everything that's going in. So, yeah, but in regards to prior to that, Alex, with Jim and stuff and STRs, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was introduced to Jim, I suppose, indirectly from Anthony Wills, Kilhoman. And Kilhoman hadn't, it wasn't designed by Jim originally, but he came in very much to help them at the second phase, if you like, and did a fantastic job for them. So I got chatting to him probably late 2009, once we decided that this is what we wanted to do. And at the time, he didn't really have any projects apart from, I suppose, Cavalan, early doors. He was certainly hopping over there quite regularly. So he was great because it was almost like a blank canvas. He hadn't, even though he had his kind of recipe of how to distill, and that's coming from his chemistry background because he was very much a chemist. He was still very much open to me, to my input or to our input as Adelphi as well. So the two biggest things he did for us was, one, introduce us and hold our hands in terms of working with Forsyths, who manufactured the equipment. So we designed the distillery equipment with the help of Jim. And then the second one was introductions to both Kentucky and to Jerez for casks, for bourbon and sherry. The bourbon one, unfortunately, fell through because the company we were introduced to was then bought over by another larger company. But we worked our way around that. But we discussed STR casks quite a lot. I was fairly frank with Jim. I said, I don't think this is going to suit what we want to do to Ardnamurchan. It's an enhancement to maybe a lighter spirit. It works very well. But when you're trying to allow the environment and the weight of your spirit to show itself, uniquely, you don't want to potentially mask it in a different way or change it. So, yeah, he was incredibly useful in terms of design, but he also allowed me to kind of get on with chiseling our own little piece of distillation rock, if you like, in terms of the way we wanted to go. And Connal mentioned one of the things that we have up here, which is so special to us, so unique to us, is our water. I mean, before it goes through the now required UV filter, it is literally the colour of a mahogany table. It's dark, peaty water, and it has all that flavour sitting there.
And so, just really quickly on that, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, because Connal, you had mentioned that you use that water for bringing the ABV down on your whiskeys. So when you say it goes through a UV filter, that just takes away all of the color within the water, but all the other compounds, it doesn't affect it in any other way?
So you need ironically, it was European law, so I'm not sure we adhere to those anymore, but I think we do. We have to kind of copy them for the moment. You've got to remove particulates, whatever they're called, and colour, basically, as far as you can. There is, as far as I'm led to believe, there are no holiday accommodations in this area of West Scotland that actually pass the European testing regime. You just cannot filter that amount of peat out of it. Oh, wow. So, you still get a lot of flavour, even after it's been through all that filtration. And you can taste it. We've been sampling again, about 3 weeks ago? We did another 2 days in the warehouses, so a year on from the first one. And some of the later stuff, some of the young 2-year-old, 3-year-old spirit and whiskey that we have, is you can really taste the water, water's influence in it at that stage.
So what's the water bringing? What is it bringing as far as flavor goes that the spirit itself isn't bringing?
I would like to think it's texture predominantly. I think there's a lovely oily texture to it, a lovely kind of peaty, oily texture. It also provides not a peat smoke, obviously, but a peat flavour to even our unpeated whiskey. So what we're finding now is Ardnamurchan matures. We're just over 7 years. We do have this. Some of the flavour you can't really put your finger on. You can't go, oh, that's because we're using such and such a yeast, or that's because our cut is such and such in the distillation. Mm-hmm. It's something else, and I'm sure a lot of that's down to the water and the maturation as well, the climate.
Okay. Jess, I realize I'm monopolizing all of their time.
No. I'm really fascinated by the talk of water, because it's something that obviously a lot of bottlings that are finalised and finished down here in the central belt of Scotland, it's not necessarily something we talk about water like that. And my grandparents have done Harris, and so I know the full traumas of getting into a peat water bath. It's a very unappealing looking thing to get into. Even when it's coming at you through a shower, it's pretty disturbing. But yeah, I don't know if I really think that our water tasted very peaty, but maybe, that's a totally different landscape, so maybe it was that our peating level on where our house was not as extreme. I certainly don't remember there being any filtering requirements, but that's because I think Harris is a bit of a law unto itself. I'm not sure whether or not they'd have been infilling filters in the hills where we were, but it's, and I guess that's an interesting angle as well. It's something that I've often thought about when you're filling casks and you're using that water to reduce it, like you say, to bring it down to 63.5. So that's an interesting, I guess, unique variable for you guys to be having with your casks. Put on top of, all the other kind of individual little twists that you've got in the distillery. I'm really intrigued by that.
I think, I'd love, well, I actually probably wouldn't love, but I'd love to know scientifically what it's actually doing. But it is definitely something like that, because it's not being replicated elsewhere, even, across the water from us here, at our neighbours. And it was actually the lovely late Colin Ross from Ben Nevis, when he heard that we were thinking about building a distillery here. He came up and gave me some very, very interesting advice, which we actually took on board, because at the time we were thinking of building a distillery that was about 90 to 100,000 litres of alcohol per annum, which for us was huge compared to what Adelphi was doing. But he said, that will never work. You could do what they call cellar door certainly in Australia, I don't know about America, but you could sell your products to people passing. You'll never get a brand you can get behind for export at that level. And what he meant was that, the marketing spend, the team, travel, everything else that's required to build a brand, you need a quantity to support that. Yeah. And that quantity is probably north of 250 to 300,000 litres long term. So we really took that on board, and we changed the whole design, because of that. But he said, if I was to ever build a distillery myself, I would build it at Ardnamurchan because of the water. And I kind of thought he's just joking. It's a nice story. But it really is interesting to know how much it potentially does affect it.
It's so interesting that idea of a visitor center plays a role in the overall interest of an importer to bring on your product. I like that was brought up in your conversation, because it's something that we at Impact, when I'm wearing my Impacts hat, you often talk about, okay, this distillery, what's their visitor center look like? What's their traffic look like, right? Because that in the end plays a role in the overall brand growth, right? And so it becomes this consideration. When we hear about distilleries like Penderyn building on 2 more distilleries to bring in tourists, right? There's a few reasons why. One is there's a lot of money in tourism, but 2, every person that comes in for a tour and then leaves with a bottle and then shares that bottle with their friend or friends, right? It just helps spread the word. So I really like that. What was the person's name from Ben Nevis again?
Colin Ross.
Colin Ross.
Who sadly is no longer with us. He was manager at Ben Nevis for decades. Reported directly to its Japanese owners for a long time.
So his point was, if you're so far away where you can't get the visitors, you may as well increase your overall production to make up for that. That's really interesting.
No, we hadn't discussed visitors at that stage. I think, it is a point that we do make, is that we built the distillery to make whiskey and the visitor centre just to allow people to see that. We didn't do it the other way around because there was no point. We are as remote as we are, and yet we're absolutely mobbed. We can't cope with the number of visitors. Well, Connal will tell you, we offered a small, we offered a cask exclusive, and it went kind of bananas.
What did that look like?
We just did a hogs. We just identified a nice wee peated 5-year-old hogshead, and very good. Still only tried it in sample format, but we went out with it a couple of weeks ago, and it's just gone mad. It's going to sell out today, I think. I just saw a message come in there. We're down to 8 bottles, and it was a hoggy, so I think it was 40 bottles. And you know where we are in Scotland. And it was in person, one per person. And we're not sending any away. It's just you've got to come here to get it. And there's a chap on his way up from London as we speak. So I hope he makes it.
Amazing. That's absolutely amazing. That is so cool.
That's good. Josh, but you've also ruined my weekend plans, because that's where I was going to this weekend. But
oh no!
I accidentally ended up in Campbelltown this weekend, and it was going to be Ardnamurchan next weekend. So
I've still got that much left.
For teasing me
There's
with your lovely.
There's still about 8 centimetres in there, Jeff.
There you go.
How do you download things through my computer? Where does it come at the bottom? I just put my glass underneath it. Yeah.
But no, on a semi-serious point, going back to what you were saying about Colin and the rest of it. So a lot of these people who have come up here justify this bottle. There was a lady from Wales who came in with her family on Friday who admittedly rang ahead a week before she booked accommodation. But she came up for 3 days. So yes, we benefit from the cask bottling sale, but the local B&B or the hotel or whatever, the restaurant, everyone benefits. So yeah, it's been really, really good to see that extra icing on the cake from having a visitor experience or centre.
Yeah, that's great. Before I forget, Connal, I wanted to get back to you, because you had touched on, you'd used tradition around the idea of setting your batches together, right? And I'm racking my brain trying to think of other distilleries that 6 months out of the year run peated, 6 months out of the year run unpeated, and at the end pull together a product that is 15 ppm maybe, rather than 30 ppm. And so that doesn't sound traditional. And so I'm curious where that, you told me where it came from, but I guess I'm curious, is there a reason why you don't go with 15 ppm malt for a style? Or does the idea of running unpeated and then running peated just give you the flexibility you need from designing different batches, creating, different single cast programs, etc.?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. But I think when I was referring to being traditional, I was referring to the casks that we were using in the beginning and what we were filling into. We're absolutely not traditional in regards to doing that 6 month by 6 month. You're absolutely right. I think I love the fact that we do it. It gives us that flexibility, as you said, to be able to put. For example, I'm looking at maybe next year doing just a completely limited batch of peated rum, like completely peated, and just see what that looks like. We can do, and the complete opposite, unpeated. We could do unpeated bourbon, unpeated sherry, peated sherry, but yeah, for the core single malt, we've got all those different flavors to put together, and thankfully they work, and that's something that's, for me, is really exciting. And the fact that we're just starting now to experiment with other little bits and pieces along the way, it just gives us so many different options. And it's so exciting to watch other Ardnamurchans develop. It's traditional in a cask sense to begin with, to figure out how the spirit was going to go. But yeah, not traditional in other ways.
I've been sipping the small batch for the U.S. as we've been talking, and by sipping I mean I have to refill it because I've sipped through my first little sample. But it's really remarkable and has a style all its own. Though I've heard some people say, it's reminiscent. The peat style is reminiscent of Talisker, where it's more peppery and earthy. It's not smoky. It's not iodine-y, but it's this earthy, peppery quality. And so, is that indicative of the peaty water that you use to bring down the spirit from to 63.5? Is it indicative of the peat that's being used to dry the barley? Where do you think that connection is coming, or is it just a connection in someone's head?
Yeah, very good question. It's interesting, just going back, because this kind of ties in with this question as well. When we agreed that it wasn't necessarily traditional to do 6 months unpeated and 6 months peated, I am fairly confident in saying that Talisker, although they never do, well, I don't think they do unpeated, I may be wrong, they vary their peating levels throughout the year. And the reason they do this, and it's kind of what we wanted to do, but we were a bit more extreme, is if you imagine an artist sitting there with a palette of colours, in order to make that vibrant green, you need more than just whatever makes green up. You need maybe a wee bit of that, a wee bit of that.
Yep.
So the more extremes you have in your palette, potentially the easier it is to reach that consistency and also slightly unique style. And the fact that we treat our unpeated spirit differently from our peated spirit in terms of how we distill it, or how we ferment it, and how we distill it, and in fact how we mash it as well. They all have a very slightly different regime.
Okay.
So yeah, that's just what I'd like to say on that. And then in terms of the next question, which I've now forgotten because I'm 2 years older than you. What was it again?
It was the question was, is that sort of more unusual peppery, earthy style of peat coming from the water or from the peat used to dry the barley?
So I think, again, I'm not 100% sure where Talisker has its barley malted, but I'm fairly confident we share the same region in terms of the peat, which is Highland. Yeah. And Highland peat smoke is very different from Islay because of the composition of the peat, basically. So we have a much drier heather tree root basis to our peat, whereas on Islay it would have been seaweed and much more maritime style of decomposition. And again, if you remember, I don't know if you know, but back in about 1996, 97, Highland Park closed its Orkney maltings temporarily and brought in all their malt requirements from the Highlands, from the mainland. And if you're lucky enough to have tasted their Loki, or Lurky, however you pronounce it, one of those ones in that fancy wooden box, so as far as I believe, Loki is the Norse god who was a bit schizophrenic and a bit crazy, and he never quite knew what was happening. So they chose that particular god for that run, that whiskey.
Yeah.
Because it was non-Orkney peated for the first time.
Okay.
And it's a different style. So Orkney peat, again, gives it a different flavour because it's too windy to grow many trees up there.
Sure.
So you get a different composition of the peat as well.
That's interesting. I have things to say about that release. None of them are kind. But I think the name Loki really is perfect for that whiskey. Because Loki was really good at confusing people.
Right.
I'll just leave it there. But I love what you were saying about the peat and how Talisker sort of runs at different peating levels. And as you were describing that, it made me think of the most recent Frank Zappa documentary. Has anybody except for me watched that? So on top of being obviously a strange guy, clearly, a wonderful musician who not everybody appreciates, but also a well-respected composer, there was this bit of audio that they played where he had maybe 8 or 10 people coming together, and he said, okay, your job is to play this one note. And so here he goes, and taps, and then they play the note, and it sounded beautiful. And then he said, okay, now play the note, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he says, now play the note with all your heart and soul. And then they all play the same note, but it has a completely different feeling, and they all vibrate in different ways and add little, nuance to the note that they're playing. And then it went from being very pretty to magical. And that got me thinking about perhaps what Talisker is doing to create their very specific flavor profile. And it gets me to thinking of what you guys do when you're blending your peated and your unpeated. It's this marriage at the end that produces this lovely spirit that I cannot stop sipping on. It's really, really quite gorgeous.
I'm going to have to watch that documentary.
Are you a Zappa fan? That's like most people. Yeah, I'm a Zappa dork. I couldn't not watch that. I wanted to switch gears quickly and talk about Adelphi, if you guys didn't mind. But before we did that, Jess, was there anything that you wanted to touch on?
No, I was maybe we'll come back around to this after we have done a bit on Adelphi, but it was more about I'm not sure how many of our US listeners will have seen so much about here in the UK. I don't think you realise quite how lucky you are that you are getting exclusives just for you, Ardnamurchans. I'm furious because I'm going to have to twist some arms of some of my US guinea pigs to rush to the stores and buy for me so that I can get it's bad enough having to queue up at Good Spirits, that's what I'm telling you. So, but one of the really innovative things that you guys are doing with your packaging is, and I'm fascinated by it because I love a bit of kind of tech being worked into the old and the new mixed together, that you have such a really interesting idea about blockchain technology in your packaging, which I'm sort of, sorry, Connal. I'm really interested in it because it allows you to kind of become as nerdy or not nerdy as you like. So if you want to drink a lovely single cask bottle and think, well, that was delicious, and then put it in your recycling bin and then move on to the next one. But it's the idea that you're handing the consumer a huge amount of power and information. That maybe that means that they won't be handing you by email, Connal being like, what specific barley and field and geolocation did this come from? And now you can just say, it's all there. It's in your bottle. Before you recycle it responsibly, go away and find the technology. I just wondered how you guys got to that point. I mean, that's a whole level beyond. We'll tell you some information on a label, right?
Yeah. Before Alex sends you to sleep, I'll just tell you my very inexperienced part. This has all been Alex, the whole blockchain technology. What I will say is modern now is that it's really at the most exciting stage in the fact that we've been trialing it now for, I want to say, maybe 4 years now. Maybe it's not as long as that, but it's taken, so that's to this stage now where we're at the point of it's only going to get so much better for the whiskey enthusiast. So when you do scan that, you can dive as deep as you want down that rabbit hole, and we're just going to load it with information. So you can go as far as you want, and it's only going to improve year on year. Alex, myself, but mainly, certainly these days, Jenny Carlson has been dealing with it and is also working on many other exciting things linked to blockchain technology. So, but blockchain technology, that is very much over to you, Alex, if you want to, send the poor listeners to sleep. That's fine.
I was going to say that even though this is a podcast, we can still hear you snoring. No, look, thank you so much, Jess, for bringing this up. It's music to my ears. But very, very briefly, the whole part that you've described, the consumer, interaction and awareness part, and offering this window into everything that we do, that is very much the icing on the cake to the reason that we chose blockchain in the first place. I was given the opportunity to trial it by someone who'd actually built it to trace a food product from the field to the supermarket, basically. And even though the US has seen a lot more use of that than we have in the UK over the years, and I believe one of the giants like Walmart, you now have, as a supplier, you now have to be blockchain enabled just to get a listing in Walmart.
Oh, wow.
And that, specifically for them, that is so they can dramatically shorten the time, effort, money, resources put into doing product recalls. Mm-hmm. Because they can trace back to that individual component issue within seconds, or the blockchain can, rather than having to recall thousands of different lines. But that's not why we chose it. We chose it so that we could rely on its completely incorruptible ledger system. So if you imagine a diary which you're writing every day, and it gets a padlock put on it, you cannot change it. Mm-hmm. So all the production and supply chain information eventually will be automatically going up into our diary, into our ledger, which is in the blockchain, and that will then sit there. And so if you imagine one cask has multiple lines of different blockchain data in it, if you like, in terms of the mash, where the barley came from, the farmer's name, everything. It's all there. And when that cask gets put together with 70 other casks to make an Ardnamurchan small batch in 5 years' time, mm-hmm. That information simply downloads to the consumer should they want it or should they want any of it. It's all via a QR code into your smartphone. So yeah, it's for us. It's the most important part is our production system, and then the second most important part, which is it's becoming really exciting, is the consumer interaction once the bottle's out there.
Yeah.
And as Connal mentioned, that part is about to become a whole lot more exciting in the next few weeks, hopefully.
Yeah, I was going over the information with Jenny Carlson last week sometime, and what I love about it is it answered all of the questions that I would get asked if I'm doing a seminar on a brand. Right? What's the barley you're using? What's the mashing look like? What are the temperatures of the water? Right? How long is it fermented? What are your cut points? What casks are you using? And you really go into depth on that. You can make you can make the most inquisitive German happy with all of the answers that you provide in your blockchain information.
But the great thing is we don't have to. We simply are doing this. We're going about our everyday jobs, making whiskey, and it's recording it.
Yeah.
And then it's available to anyone that wants to see it. So we're not physically having to add in any marketing, support information at any given point. It's all there, which is great.
I think that's really cool. I do think we were talking yesterday about this, the change, even in the time I've been in the industry, because I've been doing whiskey-ish things for about 12, 13-ish years. And the difference in between the kind of conversations I used to have with people who were wanting to know more about what was in the bottle or wanting to make a more informed choice about what to buy as a gift of themselves. I think the conversation has changed massively. People, some of it is to do with the huge developments in the internet, but I think there's also that means there's loads more information, and it's whether or not it's distilleries becoming much more transparent in their processes, so people really get a feel for what makes Ardnamurchan compared to another distillery. But I think it's also that once you start empowering people, that it's not a secret. It's not a case of this information is not for you. It's if you want it, you can have it. If you want to just sail on through and drink the whiskey, then you're equally welcome to do that. And I just think that's really exciting, the difference that, having with people, and this will maybe lead into our discussion about Adelphi, like the conversation about independent bottlers was like a kind of 2-sentence thing where it was, you rushed through it and then you went back to talking about the big brands. It was, independent bottlers are these guys who kind of don't own a distillery, but they like to put things in bottles under their names, even though they didn't do the work for it. Have we told you about the new release this week from Highland Park? And it was kind of this slightly awkward conversation as somebody who used to be involved in the training of staff that I worked with. And I did write like a whiskey training book, and I've only got like a not quite so scathing review of independent bottlers, but it wasn't a big part of our trade. We had kind of the bigger names, and then they just took up a small portion of the shelf. They weren't really doing a lot of work. And I was in a specialist retailer, so we probably had the most exposure to independent bottlers you could get. And so now I think it's really exciting to see. Blockchain is probably a lot more advanced than I would have thought of in terms of giving out information to people, but that's really cool. That's why I'm not in charge of coming up with innovation at Single Cask Nation. It's beyond me. I don't come up with these things, but I love the idea of like empowering people, because I think that's really important, because then people are gonna, I think, will come back to you. They'll be like, well, these people were really straight with us and we've identified some things that we liked in their products, so we'll come back and try it again, as opposed to Misk that was on the bottom shelf of a dusty shop that no one really knew what it was. So that's my 2 pence worth. Sorry, Connal. It was a question I had to ask. It's too long for sending in on like Instagram. I've got a little slot in the podcast on blockchain technology.
Alex is just delighted. It's fine. You've made his day.
Phew.
So my question surrounding independence has a clear connection to Ardnamurchan, and I want to word this properly for a multitude of reasons. And I don't know if I'll be able to word it properly, so I'll just go for it. There are independents that have purchased distilleries, right? Gordon MacPhail with Ben Romach and Signatory with Edward Dower, and so on. But I can't think of too many independents that have built distilleries, right? It was just easier to buy. I don't know if the term is it's easier to buy a distillery. But the point I'm trying to get at is it seems Ardnamurchan's approach to independence in general is a bit different from some of the other independent bottlers, because I just saw there'll be a North Star Ardnamurchan, right? And there have been other Ardnamurchans bottled by independents, which seems to be really interesting. And it seems to be a stance that other independent bottlers who own distilleries aren't taking. And so I'm curious as to why that is, why you're selling to independents. What value are you putting on independence for Ardnamurchan?
Good question. Yeah, okay. So it was a bit of a debate we had, but I mean, I was always on the side that that's where we have come from. You know, our modern history since '92 has been an independent bottler. Okay, we were a distillery in the 1800s in Glasgow, but before, more recent, that's where we've come from. So I think it would be extremely hypocritical of us to not offer some decent casks to other indies and we're very much still an independent bottler, and that's very much going to remain. Adelphi hopefully will go from strength to strength and they can, we're very much all one company, but they are different. North Star, that's got out. The cat's out of the bag now, I suppose, in that.
I saw it on Facebook, so I imagine if it's on Facebook, then all
it must be true.
It must be true.
It must be true if it's on Facebook. But yes, no, you are correct. That is happening. There's been a few SMWS bottlings, and of course the first being Adelphi. So we wanted to be the first to do our own stuff, which was a bit of a full circle weird thing. Is that an independent bottling? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good question. If Adelphi bottles in Ardnamurchan, is it an independent bottling?
I'm going to go and say yes, but I don't know. It's a good question. It was in a different bottling, but yeah. Basically, in short, Alex and I and the team, we all agreed. I think it was a pretty easy decision that we're not going to certainly flood the market or anything with it, but we're just going to be careful and work with the independent bottlers. It's so much more than just making a sale of a cask or whatever it may be. It's about selecting that cask with with Ian, for example. It's not just. It's about guiding the process, and hopefully maybe working again with them. So it's a really exciting part of it is seeing Ardnamurchan being bottled and by other people. I think that's really exciting.
I think that point is a really good one, that you're playing a part in that cask as well, right? Because I think your point is a good one, where larger companies may want to be protective of their brand, but how do they do that? If you're a distillery and you're producing 4 million liters of spirit per year, a lot of that's going into blend, and what isn't going into blend goes off somewhere else. And if there's a name attached to that could be, and that cask ends up being shit, then it ends up potentially negatively affecting that distillery, potentially. But the fact that you're in it from the beginning to say, no, we're working with them because we want to help them show a side of Ardnamurchan that shows us in the best light. Are there any other precautions but things you do to ensure that Ardnamurchan is showing the best, not just in your bottle, Adelphi's bottle, some other independent bottler's bottle? What other things do you do to ensure that quality?
Well, I'd like to say that everything in the warehouse is of a quality that doesn't require us to ensure it. But no, obviously there'll be things which aren't ready. We actually, just on that, and I will sidetrack very briefly, the whole maturation profile, if you like, of a new distiller is quite complicated, because you could just shove everything into first fill wood or virgin oak and have it all ready within 5 to 10 years. But you end up with a very small window of style, if you like. It's very hard to move out of that window if that's all you've got. So one of the things that we've been very careful to do is to build into our wood management program a certain percentage of good quality refill casks every year. And we have different maturation sort of microclimates within different warehouses as well, all because of where they are on the rock or the hillside. So we're kind of trying to allow some things to mature long term and some things a bit quicker, and not have all our eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
I think in terms of trying to make sure that nothing goes out the door that isn't to our standard, as Connal said, we certainly help the independent bottlers select the casks that they're buying off us. It's very much a mutual selection. The only company that we have filled, reasonable quantity for since the outset, we just made sure that they fill our own wood, so we know the casks are of the same quality that we've got. Yeah. That's the best we can do, really.
Yeah, that's great. And I should have been clear. when I was talking about the assurance of quality, I should have led with, it's obvious there are some casks that are doing very specific things and they would work well within a batch, but maybe not as a standalone, right? Because that's difficult to find a standalone cask that is providing a nose, palate, and finish that a blended product or a product where you married a multitude of casks. So I should have been clear. I wasn't trying to say you're potentially maturing some not so great stuff, because I know that's not the case at all.
No, absolutely. But just to give you an extra wee bit there, that so far, everything that's gone into an Ardnamurchan bottle is past Alex's and mine and most of the team's nose and possibly palate, even when we're putting together the small batches. So, you have 70 casks and anything that's single. So when you were nosing these samples, anything that we feel has got maybe something, an edge, let's say, to it, that just gets starred and it goes into the single cask pile. So it's got a lot of there. Like for example, we do have a small pool now to pick from of things that are maybe just above the rest, if you like, and that's something that it needs to be deserving to be a single cask bottling, and we're not offering sort of one sample to indies. We like to give people a choice, so we just put it to them. Ultimately, if we're happy for it to go into a bottle, we'll just put some samples to people and just see what they think.
Brilliant, Jess. I see you standing there, waiting.
Just chewing over your revelation that you just made. I was going to ask about single casks and picking, obviously on the assumption that all the stuff is really good. But I'm also coming at it from a slightly biased angle that I'm with a small group of friends and we own a couple of casks as just regular Joes that really like whiskey at Ardnamurchan, and that we're very excited about one day when travel permits us going up and kind of poking at them in the warehouse. I'm sure they're by the door labelled Jess and her friend's cast. Just the idea of that's definitely a trend that we can see in the newer distilleries. You guys are full of part of a handful of distilleries that have offered for a limited period of time the cask programs and the opportunity that if you so wish to have a cask of your own up at the distillery. I was wondering if that was something that you... because I think you guys have finished doing that now. Have I picked that up wrong? That maybe they're only a small... I quite like the idea of being a slightly exclusive club. If we were quick on the draw at getting in, and now these Johnny-come-latelys are not entitled to casks. But I think that's really an exciting way of kind of building. It touches on everything we've talked about. It's an exciting way of building a brand loyalty, of maybe encouraging a few people who were just looking for something fun with friends to hang out and do. I've met a couple of people recently who I didn't realise were also fellow cask owners, which I think is going to be really cool, that when there's a chance for us to pull samples in later years, that we can all swap and kind of do just what you spoke about there, like picking for bottling, but the idea of maybe saying, well, my friend, I really like their one, that we'll swap a couple of bottles here and there, which I think that's really exciting, kind of not really independent bottling, but the idea of swapping mixing and matching of your own Ardnamurchan, I think is really exciting for the future. We've got, because we bought them obviously at the beginning, we have a bourbon and a sherry cask. But I was going to ask you about if you had any feelings towards maybe some of the changes in SWA rules recently about different casks. So we've stuck with fairly traditional, although you guys have done interesting French oak, and you've got a nice looking Spanish cask sample there, Alex. But what about, are we going to see something funky like a mezcal cask Ardnamurchan in the future, or rum or something? Maybe something not as weird as mezcal. Rum casks or, something else?
Well, great question and very good timing. But we have started to do little bits and pieces, There's some port pipes as we speak in Warehouse 2. We have recently managed to secure some Foursquare rum barrels, which came directly from Foursquare, which was wonderful. We've also taken delivery of Sauterne and Madeira barriques. I must say I was very impressed with the Madeira. I don't know if you've seen them, Alex, but they looked fantastic. what else did you ordered something silly as well? What else did you order? You did order them, didn't you?
Which one?
Tequila. Did you do?
Oh yeah, tequila. We've got some tequilas, just a handful coming on the next container from America. But we obviously have now a good relationship with this particular domain in the Champagne region of France. You may have alluded to with your French joke observation. Which is basically it's Chardonnay. It's not champagne because we can't call it that. But they are delicious. We only get the whole outturn every year is 10 casks from that winery.
Oh, wow.
So we get the 10. These are casks which are hand-picked in terms of the build, so the makeup of the staves in terms of individual toasting levels down to that level of detail, hand-picked by the eventual owner of the bottles that will come out of what fermented in that. So that's how specialised that specific champagne is in that specific domain. And they are amazing. So they change them every year. So we get 10 very fresh casks. And the champagne apparently is amazing too. We haven't yet been allowed to try it. But we are, whatever we do in terms of the cask management, where possible, we're trying to have some kind of relationship with as far down the line as possible. So, for example, the Paul Lanois casks from the Champagne region, we now know the guys really well. We've had Ardnamurchan. There's a particular Ardnamurchan customer who actually took a bottle of the Paul Lanois release to Champagne Paul Lanois, to the domain, and opened it and drank it with the owner.
Wow.
And it was the first time he tried it. So that's how close we've all become. And I'm doing the same with our Madeira, with our Sauterne, the Foursquare connection, Spain as well, Jerez, and America as well. We know exactly where they've come from. I think that's the most important part for us, is having that part of that sort of blockchain traceability, if you like, all the way back to square one as far as we can.
Yeah, that is super cool. 10 casks per year, and that's what they do per year, and then you get all 10 casks.
So they do other stuff. They do other champagnes, but this is their kind of pinnacle.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So their pinnacle is just the 10.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we get them, and they are different. So the first batch that we put together, the one that released in April, I think it was this year. When I was going through the casks, I got all my notes together of the toasting levels on each of the casks that we've been given, and it has made a complete. There is a significant point of difference between how the Ardnamurchans have turned out with the years finishing in those casks.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. It's very fun to play around with.
Very cool.
I have a tiny bit of it left here on my desk. But I think I may save. I'm slowly stepping on. I also wanted to give a little shout out because the guys at Good Spirits here in Glasgow had made it relatively easy for me to obtain one of their bottles for the tasting we did earlier in the year with Connal and Graham. We pulled a few strings, so we made sure we had it. So I'm just drinking this while you're showing off with your American release. I'm just drinking one that you can't have because I'm drinking it here.
Touche.
I'm a bit of a magpie. I like to collect together all these different kind of shiny whiskies, so it's quite nice to be able to do a comparison. So I'm really looking forward. I think what you guys are doing is really considered in your releases, like you're saying. If you've gone to the effort of sourcing casks where there's only 10 a year, I think that's, it's obviously a whiskey worth trying, that it's going to have an impact enough to justify the legwork for chasing 10 casks to make it all the way to the West Coast Peninsula. I think that's pretty cool.
We can't wait to go on a road trip to visit all these people, which we haven't been able to do for the best part of 2 years.
So I have one last question for you both to get us out of here on. The last time, Alex, I had you on here again is back in 2018. And since then, we had a lovely 2019. The first 3 months of 2020 were absolutely fantastic. And then we entered hell. And back in 2018, I'm sure we asked you, what are you most looking forward to? Which your future self likely didn't know what we're living in at the time when you answered that question as your past self. Anyway, my question to you now is, it being 2021, almost 2022, both you and Connal, what are you both excited for? Both in the near future and maybe the next couple of years as we're hopefully emerging through COVID in some way, shape, or form.
I'll take this first because you might nick my answer. No, because I've got one, and I'll go blank if I sit in it for too long. So yeah, what I'm looking forward to is actually taking Ardnamurchan to whiskey enthusiasts all around the world for the first time, face to face. Zoom has had its time; it still will continue, and it's a wonderful thing. However, we have not had the chance to pour someone a dram face to face and look them in the eye and see if, really see and hear their thoughts on the whiskey that has been produced in the West for the last 7 years. And of course, just watching Ardnamurchan grow, and hopefully it will, and go from strength to strength. And we've got lots of exciting things on the horizon. We just want to, it's baby steps, and we'll just take it as it comes. And yeah, for me, that is the most exciting thing, is being able to get out there and bang the drum as loud as we can and get it in front of people. And just seeing everyone in the trade again, and getting over to the US as well. That's another thing I'm very much looking forward to doing, is getting over there and seeing what the fine folk think of it over there.
Yeah, I was trying to think of having you guys out for a week. What do we call the tour? Is it Ardnamurchan? I think that might be what we call the tour. Ardnamurchan.
Well, we are just about neighbours. I mean, there's nothing else between us, I think.
Yeah. That's amazing. Ardnamurchan. There you go. Jess, you can shake your head, but that is pan-genius level.
Boom. See?
Well, I'm shaking my head because I don't get a US tour, but I'm quietly writing in the New Zealand thing, which is very much in my territory, and I have family down there, so I'm calling that shotgun.
You should.
The rest of them can pull straws for it.
Definitely shotgun. Ardnamurchan.
There you go. And
you could do it on your way back from your Ardnamurchan tour. You could come back through New Zealand. We could all have a hangout down there. That'd be strange. Hang out in real life on the other side of the world.
Oh, we'll be there if it's going ahead.
You need to create shirts that say Ardnamurchan on it. Maybe it wraps around from the chest to the back, because it's going to be such a damn long word. Ardnamurchan.
Instead of doing the Land Rover tour like Coleman, what can we do? We could do Teslas. We could do the Tesla tour. There you are. Electric, driving, renewable distilling.
Yeah, I like that. And if it's with your green initiatives. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about you, Alex? What are you looking forward to? Seeing as you don't have a chance to use Connell's answer, you've got to come up with your own.
It'll be much better.
I was going to say, excuse me while I go and fetch the keys to my DeLorean, because I can't remember what I said in 2018. But I think it may be along the lines of, I'm really looking forward to seeing a bottle of Ardnamurchan on a shelf. And ironically, I don't think I have actually even seen that yet, because of the world that we've been living in for the last 18 months and the whole internet, communication boom. Most of our whiskey has exported or domestically sold direct into people's houses. And I may be wrong. I mean, there's bound to be a bottle somewhere in a shop on a shelf.
Yeah.
But I haven't yet laid eyes on it. And so I'm really looking forward to doing that. And secondly, and this is kind of what Connal was saying as well, the various experiments that we are now enjoying up here, so the extras, it's in phase 2, if you like, of the distillery. And then one in particular, which kicks off tomorrow.
Ooh.
So when I came into the distillery late last night, we have a little staff accommodation, so we bed sit. So I went in there, fell asleep, and that was great. Woke up in the morning, opened the door, and I got knocked over by the smell of peat smoke. We are running our first heavily peated batch through the stills tomorrow. We're only doing about 3 weeks of it this year, just to see how it goes. But the smell coming off the washbacks is phenomenal.
What's heavily peated for you?
We're doing 80.
Oh, okay.
80.
Okay.
So pretty decent level. I kind of hope. Well, I really hope that it works, because we'll start to build in that more regularly into the annual makeup.
And so, all right. So if you're running 6 months of peated and you find that the 80 ppm is working out, is just 3 months the trial, and then you'll see if you can incorporate that a bit more, or do you even know where it might lead to?
No, this trial is 3 weeks. It's only.
Oh, did I say 3 months? I meant 3 weeks. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so 3 weeks. Yeah. So again, it's going to take time. I mean, obviously, we'll be able to tell a certain amount from the spirit that runs, not the first batch, but certainly the second, once the vapes have cleared through a bit. We will put, like we did with early Ardnamurchan, we will put some of it into smaller casks to give it an accelerated maturation, purely for our own, just to see, how it's coming on. And if it does work, and I think it's going to work really well with sherry casks, just a gut feeling I've got, then what we'll probably do is still keep 50-50 with the standard peated and unpeated. Oh, okay. So, but bring in maybe 2 months of heavily peated as well as a standalone, and we can then decide whether to use that in the mix with the core expression, or purely run it as a separate limited release going forward.
I had hoped that you'd said you were going to put it into small sherry casks, because as soon as you said 80 ppm, I said, I wonder what they're going to do. And my heart told me, I hope it goes into sherry. I hope it goes into sherry. And it's going into sherry. That has me so excited.
I had a wee bit of a revelation. I think it was last year. Lockdown plays strange things to your mind in terms of time. But I think it was last summer. I was outside the house one evening trying what was to become the first independent bottling, McLean and Bruce, Adelphi, like Ardnamurchan. So that was released in November, December, I think, last year. So we were trying it, and it was a double cask. So it was 2 sherry butts, sister casks put together, because one was extreme and one was a little bit less. So they kind of married beautifully in the middle. And it suddenly occurred to me that the flavour profile in those sherry butts, and I'm not trying to be arrogant here or anything, but it just reminded me of some of the older, heavily peated, what we know as Brewer, the Clownish style. Yeah, sure. Like. And I really wanted to tweak up. I wanted to raise the volume level on the peat in my glass, but I couldn't, just to see what it was like. So that's what I'm hoping. That's what I'm really looking forward to, seeing how this, in 2 or 3 years' time is going to taste. Because it does have that kind of dirtiness, that sort of funk that we have somehow found.
That's brilliant. Yeah, you wonder though if that ages out after time, some of that funk.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
We tried a 7-year-old unpeated sherry last night at a tasting last night, and Oliver Chilton from Elixir was on the tasting, and he just messaged me after it saying that was dank. So yeah, that was in a good way.
That's a great compliment.
Yeah, and I said, well, thank you for the highest praise, sir. That was fantastic. But hopefully we can have that mustiness, that dankness that we all know is a good thing in whiskey, mainly.
Well, Alex, you had talked about it a bit earlier, where when we were talking about the casks that you're using and why you stay away from STRs, because you find lighter spirit tends to go with the STR, but your heavier spirit, you just didn't think that it would work out. When I think of the heavier spirits, I think of the Broras, or I think of the Mortlucks of the world, and especially with Mortluck, I usually don't find their whiskeys to be as good in single digits as they are in, say, 12 years and up. So you have this level of funk coming through, this heaviness coming through. I realize I should have asked this question earlier on, not as we're trying to get out. But, you know, where is that heaviness coming from? And how is it so damn approachable? Right? Like, in a way, I'm afraid to see that age out. Right? I never want to let that go. And so where's that coming from?
But, I mean, this is full circle to what I think Connal answered the question originally, but it's a question about Jim Swan and how. No, I think we both answered it. What I didn't say at the time was that Jim's recipe, the whole sort of new profile of distillation, thanks to Jim Swan, and we're talking several distilleries that are now on the market, thanks to him. His recipe was to basically enable a startup distillery to arrive on the market in terms of bottled product far quicker than traditionally was associated with a long-term maturation climate like in Scotland.
Yep.
And he did this primarily by, I don't know what he did chemically, but it's basically to bypass oxidization, or the requirement to have gone through an oxidized stage in maturation. And it's a combination of his mashing, his fermentation, his distillation regimes that does this. And then to put it in, if required, because it's a lighter, faster maturing spirit, then to put it in fairly active casks like the SDR ones, which have been scraped and recharred and all the rest of it. That combination gives you a very drinkable product within 3 years.
Sure.
And we've seen it from countless distilleries. Where we differ, certainly in our peated, and to a certain extent in our unpeated too, is one of the key things in his recipe was that you should not stir up your mash at all. It should be the cleanest wort, the liquid that comes off the mash into the fermenters. And we do have a special sight glass to check that cleanliness, the clarification, if you like, that comes through. But we agreed with him that we would stir. We wanted oil in that oiliness you get from stirring. So we've kind of gone part Jim, part not Jim, and that I would say is right the way through the process, which has allowed us to come up with a slightly heavier spirit that is also seems to be benefiting from his way of producing a faster maturing whiskey.
Okay, so this is getting a little bit back to Connal, what you were saying about tradition, creating a more traditional spirit in a way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's very cool. That's very cool. Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you.
That was really excellent. Thanks to Alex and Connal. Thanks to you and Jess. That was a great, great conversation. What I enjoyed is the last time I was at the distillery was May of 2014, when I was doing a little jaunt around Scotland with Mark Connolly.
Oh, wow.
And Mark and I were visiting really the new kids on the block.
Yeah.
And I'd gone off to Daftmill, and I'd gone off to Strathearn, and I went off to Annandale. And of course we went off to Ardnamurchan, and it was a great little trip that Mark and I enjoyed together. But that was 2014. We saw them 2017 when we were all over for the Great Isle of Swim tour, but we started off in Oban.
Yep.
And they were pouring some 2-year-old and 3-year-old stock.
Yeah, that was
at the Oban, or the West Coast Whiskey Festival.
West
I think it was
Coast
called.
Whiskey Phage. Yep, West Coast Whiskey Phage. And the guy pouring, I think his name was Mac. Lovely guy. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and so that was 17. So there's 14, there's 17, and now here we are having this catch up in 21. You of course had the interview with Alex and Charlie back at Maltstock in 2018.
Yeah, so 14, 17, 18, 21.
21. Keep checking in here. See how things are going. So that was tons of fun. So thanks.
As we were listening back to that, I don't know if I told you this, but I poured a little bit of our new Westland 16-year-old, but I recently brewed some.
Wait.
Yeah.
Our Westland 16-year-old?
Jesus Christ. I poured some of our 16-year-old Westport.
Yes.
And I decided to brew some tea as well, some green tea, some upper end, higher shelf Dragon Well. There's a few different grades, and this was the higher grade of them. And
I love Dragon Well.
Dragon Well's really nice. And I have to tell you, the tea paired so wonderfully with that, with the 16-year-old Westport, with that delicate fruitiness and the earthy sherry, and then you get that kind of slightly salty umami grassiness from the green tea. It just worked perfectly, and I feel I needed to share that with you as both a whiskey lover and a tea lover.
Dragon Well is also known as Long Gin, right?
I think it's Long Duck Dong. Oh, dong.
Dong. Dong.
Dong, Grandpa is talking to you.
Dong. Where is my automobile?
I don't know what's happening right
Sexy
now.
American girlfriend. No, none of this?
Oh, sexy girlfriend!
Are you kidding me? Americans my
Do you need
age
an
or
intervention
thereabout. Americans my age or thereabout know exactly what's going on. This is 16 Candles, Molly Ringwald. And they had a foreign exchange student living with them named Long Duck Dong.
Just thinking about our European listeners and our Asian listeners and our Australian and New Zealand listeners.
My concern is that I've just really upset all of our listeners in China. I was not trying to upset you. I apologize. This is from an 80s American film. And I decided to make a joke.
I love that it started out waxing lyrical about top shelf Chinese tea and then ended up with 1980s American movie racism.
And you
nothing.
wouldn't, just like this Westport with the tea, you wouldn't think they would go together, but they really do, Jason. So,
who got racism in my tea? Who got tea in my racism? That's a Reese's peanut butter cup line if anyone's keeping score at home.
Yeah,
You got chocolate in my peanut butter. You got peanut butter in my chocolate.
Yes,
So.
I think the same people who didn't get my reference to 16 Candles also didn't get your reference to Reese's peanut butter cups.
I think you are correct. It's amazing we still have a podcast 5 years in. Why have we not been shut down by somebody? Let's move on to a very quick news segment.
Extra, extra! Read all about it! Life story of Playboy Penny! Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it! Me and that Playboy in trouble again!
The one thing that I wanted to bring up is the two Westlands that we've been talking about for month after month after month. What did you call them?
Schrodinger's Westlands.
Schrodinger's Westland, because they got lost somewhere, and maybe they existed, and maybe they didn't. Anyway, the good news is the bottles are en route to our warehouse now, and hopefully, with luck, we will start shipping these bottles out to those who purchase the week of August 30th.
That would be nice.
Yep.
That would be nice.
Yep. That's
Yeah,
the
I'm excited to obviously get these out the door. You and I have been talking about them for so long. But there's one other thing I wanted to throw in here. These are obviously US releases. They are sold to the nation online. However, the nation has a global following. If you have a friend in the United States, you can enter, you can buy these if you win, you can have them sent to that American address. We're within our rights to do that, and then you're within your rights to get them by hook or by crook, as we say in Scotland.
Yep.
But look what you and I, not to speak out of school, but you and I buy bottles in Australia, you and I buy bottles in Scotland, you and I buy bottles in Europe,
yeah.
and we work to get them here by hook or by crook.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes if that means we're flying out to see that friend and they've been holding on to the bottle for a while and it comes back in the suitcase, there you go. So that's I'm glad you clarified that point, Jason, about this being an American release, because we are becoming and have become more international. It's even more so now. People are really starting to cast an eye in our direction. And so we are going to start doing our best to really delineate between what is a U.S. release and what is a release for UK, Europe, Japan, Israel, or whatever. Because I can imagine there were some people who saw that Westland post, and the headline says, hey, we got 2 new Westlands, and that's exciting. And if you don't read past the headline, where the next line says, this is a U.S. release, I can understand you getting excited, and then you dig deep and you hear that you can't get it being outside the U.S. I can understand people being upset. So we want to avert that as best as possible.
And to add on to that, the ROW component, the rest of the world component, the non-US component of Single Cask Nation is still relatively new since 2019.
True.
And we're working to get some of these unique expressions that we have access to for the US side of things out farther afield. We are working on that behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. We're not there yet. Pricing gets difficult, the bottling, the shipping, blah, blah, blah. But it is on our radar.
Just think about the tariffs on American whiskeys going over to Europe right now. If we did bottle some Westlands for Europe, it would have a 25% premium on it, right? So there are various reasons why it's going to take us a while to mirror as best we can what we do in the U.S. to what we do for the rest of the world. But Jason, like you had said, it's something that we constantly think about, we constantly work on. We'll get there. It's just going to take us a bit of time.
Yep. And as we've been doing all summer long, we continue to talk about ROW number 3, UK Rest of World release number 3. And it is very, 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 very close to going live. Very times 4 or even 5.
Ooh.
Yeah, soon we will be hearing from Jess about that. I know I said that way in the beginning of the summer, and some smart people have reached out to say, whatever happened to that plan? Well, it's still a plan. It's just, we're not quite there yet. But you hear from Jess in this episode, and maybe you hear from Jess again in the next episode. Yeah. And what a world it will be.
Speaking of hearing from people, we've heard recently from some listeners, and I have some emails that I want to bring to your attention and to the attention of our listeners. So let me grab my phone. So the first email we got it's another one from Dr. Matt Bishop. He seems to be on a tear recently with his emails to us. And the subject reads, why are barrel picks so awesome? And then parenthetical comment. Parenthetical comment says, when reading awesome, please use Bruce Russell's fantastic accent. Now that note was just for me, but I'm not good at doing the Southern accent. Can you try it, Jason? Living in the South? Give it a go, Jason. We've already offended so many people in this episode. We are not going to take on the South. They may very well rise again. So, that's true. Okay. So the email begins, Dear Joshon and Joshua. He's clearly having too much fun. I knew it would be I knew it wouldn't be too long before I put fingertips to keyboard to draft another email to my favorite Padcost presenters, and after listening to this week's adventure with Bruce Russell of Wild Turkey, a question came to mind. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have a tough time reading this next line, where Dr. Matt says, I was going to re-listen to the wonderfully long and thoughtful interview, but in the time taken to listen to the first broadcast, my teenage kids have grown up, gone to university, left home, so I'll go from memory.
It was on the longer side. There's no getting away from that, but, enjoy it at your own pace.
Exactly.
Hashtag enjoy responsibly.
Yep, I've heard that many times. And he goes on, here's the thought. Single Cask Nation and other independent bottlers grow their businesses by offering customers a chance to buy one-off cask bottlings. These may be classic examples of a distillery style or variations on a theme to showcase how the spirit may mature. Now, when listening to Bruce, he spoke of these, quote, awesome, I don't know how he says awesome, but a southern twang, awesome barrel picks from his and other distilleries that were so different, so special, so crazy, and so fantastic. And so my question is, why are these barrels so special? Or in the classic Scottish phrase, how? How are these so special?
Aye.
Yeah. Here in Scotland, the common practice is to reuse and reassemble barrels, so there is likely to be more variation in the wood, but in the U.S., it is virgin oak barrels made by these tens, if not hundreds of thousands of the same specification. Surely someone could examine the wood from these crazy barrel picks to see what's going on, and if it isn't the wood, then something strange is going on. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on this. I will retire in about 10 years or so. I will retire in about 10 years, so I should be able to listen to at least a couple more complete episodes by then and hear for a response. If not, I'm sure the care home staff will let me listen when they are not playing bingo. Your avid listener, Dr. Matt.
Well, I think there was a message came through loud and clear there.
Yeah.
3.5 hour episodes maybe shouldn't become de rigueur.
Oh yeah, these. I think he was happy. I think there were people who planned their vacation days around
Months.
this. Their vacation months around this.
But it's a solid question,
Yeah.
right? Is what's going on here? And I know that you and I talk about it in such a way as to say we're looking for the off-brand moment. We're looking for the Wild Turkey cask that says rejected on it in chalk. That's our goal there. But I also think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Joshua, but I think so much of American whiskey is built on small batch or vatting, bringing together so many casks at a certain age for a certain profile. Even all of those four roses that break down according to, their different letters for casking and yeast and all that malarkey, it's still a bringing together of a number of things. And I think of a store pick having access to a single cask, just by its very nature, will give a different interpretation of that distillery style, that house vatting. I'm trying not to use the word blend, but a blend of the same casks, as Dr. Matt alludes to in his email there. And so I think, for me, to my eyes, that's where the excitement lies with the cask picks and the independent bottling side, is you are just getting that singular moment in time. It's not meeting anything else. You get an unadorned opportunity to access a certain distillery.
Yeah, I look at it well, similarly, but I guess I want to expand on it a little bit. And I want to focus on the fact that whether it's new charred oak through American distilleries or used oak through Scotch whiskey distilleries, I think there's far more variation from cask to cask to cask than most people know. And whether you're Wild Turkey or you are Kilchoman or Lafroig or Ben Riach or, insert your distillery here, you have your particular product, whether it's age stated or not, that must maintain a very specific flavor profile. And your blending team says, or your marketing team will also lean on you and say, this is how we want people to know our distillery, right? And that's the story we tell. But if you were to go to whatever distillery's batch it is, like let's say it's the Lafroig 10-year-old, and you taste through the 200 I'm just pulling a number from the sky, right? 200 casks that made up that whiskey, all of them are going to be a variation, but together, and this is where a master blender is a true artist, together that master blender can figure out how to create his or her whiskey. And that's their job, to always put forth, this is how we taste. But just by the sheer nature of you pulling out that one cask, like you said, right, taking a moment in time, that one cask, it's always going to be different from that other release. Sometimes different is better. Sometimes different could be worse. But different is always different and should leave an impression on you. And so I think it's that. I think it is that hyper, zooming in to the micro level. And
but also,
yeah, go ahead.
Because I think this speaks to what you're getting at here. Take an example with our dear friend Gene Charnas at Warehouse Liquors in Chicago.
Yeah.
Right? If you're going into Warehouse Liquors and you're talking to Gene and you're saying, hey, Gene, could you recommend a bottle to me? And Gene talks to you or gets to know your buying habits or what have you, and Gene makes a recommendation. When Gene then makes his Wild Turkey picks or his Lafroig picks, as he has done, right? You're now getting a peek into the chap who runs the store from whom you take recommendations on your buying.
Yeah.
And I think that's exciting. And as much as we love Eddie Russell and Bruce Russell and Jimmy, who we haven't really had too much chance to talk to, but as much as we love the Russells and what they're putting out under the Wild Turkey brand name, it's also good when members of the nation get to taste Jason and Joshua's interpretation of Wild Turkey, or David Jennings' interpretation, or Gene Charnas' interpretation. And I think that adds a layer of excitement to it.
Yeah.
And the same is true of UK stores that are doing these picks in UK, US, Europe. I just think it's, for those who want to geek out and nerd out, it's a chance to go a little farther down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And I think we're all of a type. Anybody who would listen to a 3.5 hour podcast put out by, Jason and Joshua, are pretty far into the rabbit hole, and they understand what we're talking about with these store picks.
Yeah, I really like what you said there, right? Whether it's our pick or our bottling or someone else's bottling or a store pick, you're getting to understand that distillery or experience that distillery through the lens of someone else's palate. And this is what draws me to certain bottlers, because then I find out whose palate my own palate aligns with, right? That's why, I will buy a Cadenhead's sight unseen. I will buy a Watt Whiskey sight unseen, and a few others. I will do that because I know that I'm going to like what those people bottled. So there is that nice aspect of it. So it's always going to be different, sometimes better, maybe not. Doesn't mean when it's not a better whiskey. It doesn't mean it's a bad whiskey. It just means it likely doesn't fit your palate. Maybe it'll fit someone else's palate.
Yeah, I like your statement that different is simply different. And it's, you know, and you and I have even said this to people, you know, when they've said, oh, I like your single cask more than the distillery's output. It's like, it's all the distillery's output, right? If you say, oh, I like your Wild Turkey more than the Russell's Wild Turkey, it's all the Russell's Wild Turkey, right?
Yeah, so what you're saying is you like Wild Turkey. Okay, got it.
Right. And so I think it's worth keeping that in mind, that you're not necessarily dealing with better or worse, you're dealing with different. And different's exciting.
Yeah.
And potentially awesome in the accent of Bruce Russell.
Ooh, I can't do it. We actually have a couple of other emails, one of which I'm going to read here. The other came from Ian Bruce, who you may remember. He wrote in with a Facebook message. He sent in an article that I think will make for a really good extra. So I'm gonna pause on that one. I'm gonna hold that one to the side. But we got an email from our beloved James Foster.
Yay! I just saw him at the 100th meeting on the Palouse, and we hugged, and it was lovely.
Did he hug you like you meant it?
He always does.
Okay, good. And the email headline reads, Mezcal.
Ah.
And so James says, I never thought to ask this, but in your latest podcast, you mentioned how someone asked you for mezcal suggestions. So, ... You know my palate, and that I'm not adverse to outliers, and you know how Idaho liquor stores make it much harder to get good stuff. So, what would you suggest for me? Now, I understand he's kind of reaching it. There's a bit more to the email, but I just want to insert this here. I understand that he's asking us this question more personally, but I think that there are a lot of people out there within the whiskey world that are hearing more and more about mezcal and are looking for a place to start. So
absolutely.
So anyway, so that's why I bring it. But I'm going to continue. I'm going to read the rest of his email.
I think you're right to use it.
By the way, I had a very interesting rum lately. He had a typo in that sentence, but I'm not going to read it aloud. I'm not going to shame him. It changed completely. Straight versus in ice versus with coconut water versus with ginger beer. It is amazingly protein. It's Claren Sajou from Saint Michael de Latale.
Wow, were you an extra in the Disney cartoon of Beauty and the Beast? Wow. That is an interesting French accent you have that comes and goes.
It just
be our guest.
It reminds me of that scene in Inglourious Bastards when they go to the movie and it's Bridget von Hammersmark and Brad Pitt and the guy who played
sounds more like Blazing Saddles.
Like something to Coco, and the other one was something Iannucci or something, and Brad Pitt's character was Enzo Gorlami, and the Jew hunter, what was his name? The bad German guy who's asking them their name says, and your name, and Brad Pitt says
Gorlami.
Say it again.
Gorlami.
Anyway, yes, my French is terrible. I assume I was speaking French. I don't know. Anyway, so it's a Claren Sajou from Saint Michael de Latale, and it says spontaneous fermentation. I'll attach a pic to the label. So. I apologize to any French speakers out there because I destroyed your language. But let's start off with James. I think you know his palate a bit more than I do. So what would you suggest to him? And then by extension, anybody who is getting into whiskey like just for the first time, and they would say, what should we try? And, the go-to is Balvenie Doublewood, and if you want to try something smoky, maybe, you mentioned a Bowmore or something like that. This kind of like stepping stone into a category, and so. What would you suggest to James, and then what would you suggest to someone who's just interested in dipping a toe into mezcal?
There's so many entry points here, and I even think there's a difference between, are you going to be sipping, or are you even going to be cocktailing?
Ooh, interesting.
And if you're cocktailing, and I know we mentioned a couple of episodes ago, and there was some really good feedback about it, but the old Gringroni that Jason makes in the summer months, when I first started making that, it was Vida. It was Del Maguey Vida.
So Del Maguey's the producer, and the bottling name is called Vida. Okay. Yep.
Right. And for me in Virginia, where we are state-owned liquor stores, just like in Idaho, I could pick that up for $35 a bottle before tax. As you're giving these kind of Scotch examples about how to dip in your toe, you're not looking to spend a lot of money. You're looking to spend a little bit of money. You're looking to see if the general category is for you. And I think Vida does a nice job of representing that general category. You could also argue Del Maguey was the beginning of this category in the United States.
Yeah, as far as it gaining a foothold and showing people that it's not the rot gut with the worm.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so I would still, I wouldn't want to be so much of a snob that I turn my nose up at what Vida offers, even though it's a dipping the toe mezcal, and there's a ton of places to go after that.
Yeah.
I will throw in that when you hear Idaho, and you hear Idaho, but then you hear state-controlled liquor stores, gosh, what kind of mezcal are they going to have? Our dear friend Andrew Miller, the Champagne of People, actually purchased end-of-line mezcal for me in Idaho, and just as we were mentioning earlier, got it to me by hook or by crook. But it's an El Junglorio.
That's not how you pronounce the name, but we'll leave that in there.
How would you pronounce it?
I think it's El Holgorio.
See, now yours sounds too much like Glory Hole.
I'm leaving all this in. It's El Holgorio. Yeah, it's El Holgorio. El Holgorio.
El Holgorio.
Yeah.
El Holgorio?
Yeah.
It's El Holgorio. And it's
no, it's not. It's not El Glory Hole. It's El Holgorio. Holgorio. Continue.
As I said, I have spoken, and it's the
El Glory Hole.
It's the Tobasici, and very small. 2014 harvest. Bottle number 161 of 460.
But
this was an end of line thing in the state of Idaho.
But you're not suggesting to people to go out and get a L.
Yes, I am.
But,
yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, I am. Because.
Yeah.
If we're gonna say dip, I will.
Just go ahead.
Let me fix my mic. If we're going to say, go and get your Vida at 35, right?
Yeah.
There are other ways to spend one's money in mezcal. And if Vida is going to be a lovely dipping of the toe, and that's going to give you access to Espadin, why not then see another part of the spectrum begin to open the door on other varietals? And Tobasici is very accessible as a varietal, but it's also very interesting, and I think starts to show what's worth exploring in the wider mezcal category. And I will say this was picked up for somewhere around $70 in the state of Idaho.
And that is, and that's where I have a bit of an issue, because anywhere else, El Hogorio mezcals, which I'm about to pour some myself, they're never that cheap, especially when you get into the more unusual agaves like Tobaziche. Like, this brand typically runs north of $90 and quite often into the lower 100s. And so while I agree with you, people should look at other types of agave, my concern is that when you go with, if you're trying to introduce someone, we shouldn't be introducing them with a high ticket item. You can find Tobaziche for a lesser price.
So let me tell you the mistake I made.
Yeah.
When I was getting into mezcal.
Okay.
I look back over these 47 years and I have identified this one. So I did it a little bit like getting into Scotch, where I thought, okay, if Scotch is malted barley and we're going to explore single malts, I'm going to go producer by producer by producer, and I'm going to get the general lay of the land. And when it came to mezcal, I came out and I bought Espadín, 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 Espadín from different producers.
Okay.
And I wanted to see, okay, now what's happening with Espadín from this producer? And what's happening with Espadín from this producer? And I feel like I delayed exploring varietals too long. And so in giving this to James, in giving this to the wider listenership, I'm saying go for a standard, gonna win you over every single time, $35 Vida Espadín, but then go and spend a bit of money, right? Even if you're just dipping your toe, spend a bit of money on a different varietal and put that different varietal from a different producer next to the Espadín from Vida. And immediately you'll see the range that this category has to offer. And I think you'll be excited by this category and what this category has to offer.
I don't disagree with you. I would just suggest that between Vida and between an El Hogorio, there's a wide spectrum that people can explore. But just looking at price points,
100%,
and then
100%,
and then on
100%,
and then on top of that, we can't turn our eyes away from the ensembles, which, in my opinion, can often be even better than the single varietals. Think of Papa Diablo, right? That is our go-to. That is just magic. Well, we used to say magic in a glass. Now we say magic in a jicara. But so let's back up a little bit. We went down a bit of a rabbit hole here. Let's get back to give James one or two mezcals just for him dipping in his toe, and then give us some, the equivalent of Balvenie Double Wood, right? The equivalent of Wild Turkey 101 or something like that for people who want to dip their toe into mezcal.
But I think when it comes to mezcal, you're better off saying, you work out how much money you want to spend, but take a look at Rey Campero. Take a look at, Nostra Soledad. What's the first word?
It's Nostradamus. It was Nostradamus. he prophesized a good number of things.
There's also a brand called Koch. Koch.
Yeah, which they've got some good. Yeah, right. A weird German name. So okay,
right.
You're taking us down this rabbit hole again, and I'm trying to get you to not do this. Hi, I love whiskey. I have a $50 bill in my hand that I'm willing to spend. Yeah. I trust your palate, Jason. What mezcal should I get? I'm in a shop. What one should I get?
Del Maguey Vida, because you're going to find it in virtually every shop you're standing in with that $50 note in your hand.
Okay, so that is for everybody. Knowing James's palate, would you suggest the same?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
There we go. That was like 20 minutes of just like, all he needed was 5 words from you, and we got 20 minutes out of the deal.
But, he also said, you know my palate, and you know I'm in Idaho, right? And so here's a bottle that I got in Idaho for a really good price that I think James should buy, if he can find it. And Andrew Miller and I might have cleared out the last of the stuff, the last of the bottles in the state.
So I'll give you what my suggestion is, but before I do, really quickly, I need to tell you this. You said, but. And I just hope that someone out there is also a Metallica fan and realize that was the same cadence as James Hetfield sings in. Oh shit! What's the name of the song? Fuck! God damn it! Is when he goes, "Do unto others as they've done to you, but." I
love it when every one of your stories misses the punchline. Like every single one.
That's because I'm the punchline with my stories. Anyway,
that was that movie. What was it called? That was that character. What was his name? That was that song. What was the name of that song? But we're not allowed to call ourselves old. Let's remember that. Obviously, Papa Diablo is awesome. But I think the reason we recommend it to everybody is we actually remember its name every time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
right.
Papa Diablo Ensemble.
Yeah.
Like, boom, done, dusted. Move on to the next thing.
My suggestion is it's a bit smokier than yours, but there's a massive amount of fruit lying beneath that smoke. And it's the standard Fidencio Joven Classico. Right? So you'll just see it'll say Classico. It might say Joven Classico. But it's about $30, $35, $40 at the most. And it's just wonderful tropical fruits with this lovely sort of ashy smoke on top. And I think it's a great sipper. And I also think it's a great cocktail component as well. And right, $30, $35, you're really not too much out of pocket.
Let me ask you a question, since we're here. And this episode's feeling a little short. Espadine is where virtually everybody cuts their teeth. It's like cutting your teeth on a space cider, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, there are those like yourself who are introduced to Scotch through Lagavulin, and maybe you come to Mezcal from something crazy, right? Kawasaki.
I came, you know how I came to Mezcal really quickly? It was Andrew Friedman from Liberty Bar. I went out there 2010, 2011.
We weren't on the same trip, and it's the same person.
Different trip. I was with my sister at the bar, and he had poured me some Del Maguey Tobola. And it was just, it was magical, right? It was like hearing the Kinks for the first time, or hearing this band that was doing something that no one else was doing for the first time, and you're just in awe. And so it was Andrew Friedman that's funny, sent us both. Well, he tried sending you down the rabbit hole.
I didn't go down the same path right away.
But
I don't even remember what he poured for me. I just remember we were talking Talisker, and he said, hold that thought. And he went away and poured a mezcal, and I don't remember what it was. And I was like, okay, smells like hangover. Okay. So here's my question to you.
Yeah.
Is Espadine, as a varietal of agave, simply an intro to mezcal that leads one off to the other varietals? Or do you think Espadine can also be a destination?
Yes. I think it could be an intro. I think it could be part of the journey. And I think it could be the destination. Because it's not just the agave. It's also the roasting. It's the fermentation. It's how they're distilling. What are they distilling in? There's so much more that goes into it than just the agave just like with whiskey, right? What kind of yeast are they using? What does their fermentation look like? How fast or slow is their distillation? All these things play a part into what that final spirit character can turn into. And I just think that Espadín, it's a cultivated agave, so there's more of it available, and it allows producers, I wouldn't call it a blank canvas. It's not a blank canvas, but it's something that can take on a good number of flavors because there's other variables to help it through to the final product.
So give me one Espadín that you would reach for, that you would say, this is the one on my shelf that I am pouring over Mexicano or Americano or Tobasiche.
Yeah.
Madraquiche,
I would. And I'm going to go back to Fidencio. I think the Del Amigo distillery or Palenque does such a wonderful job, and they had a release that was called Terra Blanca. And what made...
Oh, I have that, yeah.
You have
that.
I
got me a bottle.
I bought you that bottle.
That's fantastic.
It's a gorgeous Espadín, right?
Pricey.
But what makes it so unusual is that it didn't grow in normal dirt. It grew in white clay. Indeed. So it affected the plant differently. It's very similar to the Centenidos bottling, the Quiche de Mojo, the Quiche that had the mold on it, right? And so it ended up giving you different flavors, right? And there's another variable, just like with wine, right? What sort of soil are those grapes growing in? What kind of soil is the agave growing in? It all helps to tell the story of that final product. And I think the Terra Blanca, if people can find it, is such a lovely... It's such a lovely presentation of Espadín, and kind of like what independent bottlers do for distilleries you know and love. It gives you a different picture of that agave just through a slightly different lens.
Yeah, no, it is a great bottling. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And I'll say, I'm sitting here drinking this Tobasiche. It's absolutely fantastic.
So I actually poured a Rey Camparo Jabali, which I've started loving now that I have this Jicara from David Feldner. So cheers again, David.
Yeah, cheers, David. These are fantastic. I do find myself drinking mezcal much faster from these before the gourd can absorb some of my pour.
Yeah. So again, we have another email, but it looks like that will become an extra. But we're also running out of time here. But
we should probably wrap it up if we're going to give Matt Bishop time to see his children grow up.
That's a good point. I wonder how his grandkids are doing. I hope they're well. Listen, if you or anybody wants to reach out to us, to send us an email, please, like Dr. Matt did, like Ian Bruce did, like the good James Foster did, you can email us questions@onenationunderwhiskey.com. You can always send us a Facebook message. Just go to your Facebook search bar and look for One Nation Under Whiskey and drop us a line there. You can reach out to us through One Nation Under Whiskey Instagram. We are at One Nation Under Whiskey. You can also tweet at us. We're at One Nation Whiskey on Twitter. Whiskey, regardless of which platform you're on, will always be spelled without the E whenever it comes to anything Single Cast Nation. The last thing...
I thought you were going to say regardless of which planet you're on.
Oh, man. I wasn't, but now I want to.
Sorry, I was just off pouring some Terra Blanca there. Oh, your talk about it got me pouring it.
The last thing that I wanted to say is we're starting to get some more stars on our Apple Podcasts, right? Nice. If you wanted to leave...
They keep coming in one at a time, but we're getting there. We're getting there. 1 star at a time, soon we'll have 5.
No. If you want to leave us a comment there or leave, some sort of praise, we love praise. Please go ahead and do that, and we will read.
You do. I'm a Scottish lowlander.
Jason,
I prefer the birch. I feel more at home with the birch.
I've praised you before, and I saw your eyes light up. That one time I praised you.
That was embarrassment. I didn't know where to look.
Yeah, please do leave some comments because we'd love to read them aloud here on the podcast. And yeah, that's it. That's all I have, Jason. Do you have anything you wanted to leave our dear listeners with?
I would just give the usual thanks to our guests, Alex Bruce and Connal Mackenzie. Mm-hmm. Thanks to you and for Jess holding down the fort. That was really, really wonderful. Thanks to Matt Bishop, Ian Bruce, who we'll cover in a future extra, and of course the beloved James Foster for writing in. Thanks to you for editing. Thanks to my family for raising me. I couldn't have done it without them. I tell you, here, see, before we go out, I'm going to say this.
All right.
Our last Mates, Movies and Malts, I call it Triple M because I can't remember the order ever, with Chanel Licori, where we watched Purple Rain for the first time ever.
For the first time, yeah.
47-year-old men watching Purple Rain for the first time with a super fan in Chanel, a.k.a. Nelly. That was such a blast. I'm still thinking about that experience, and we're weeks removed from it. It was so much fun.
Yeah, obviously, after being in conversation with her and her wearing the print shirt, and, we had said, oh my gosh, we need to watch this with her. I hadn't even thought about the possibility that there would be nudity in that film, that, it's an 80s film and women are treated horribly. Like, she didn't know that we hadn't seen the film, but she was really cool about it. I just, I look
There
back.
were a few times we just kind of took our eyes off the screen and talked about some other things. But
yeah, I feel a little bad.
About what?
Oh, it was, I don't know. I don't know. It just felt weird, because she had thought that we had seen the movie. And I think it's a weird movie to say to someone, let's watch this together. And there's boobies all over the place and sex scenes.
They weren't all over the... See, this is the funny thing to me, and I've always said this. In my experience of being in the United States, where it strikes me that there's no violence that won't be shown in the middle of the afternoon.
Yes.
But when it comes to sex, easy there. Let's pump the brakes.
It's an American
slow
thing.
it
We're
down.
so prudish. We really are so prudish
Right.
when it comes to that.
And growing up, for us in the UK, we're more prudish than continental Europeans. But the BBC would sometimes show an art house movie on a Saturday night and a little bit of black and white movie making.
Yeah.
That could be very rewarding, very rewarding. And so growing up, for us, the sex side of things wasn't as off-putting. And so in watching Purple Rain with the two of you, there's half a scene where you're kind of like, oh, his hand has gone there. Okay.
It wasn't
I didn't
just
think there was
that.
anything.
It wasn't just
really,
that. It was
nothing in
it was the bad guy and his cronies, taking a woman and tossing her into a dumpster.
That was deeply problematic. But as far as the quote-unquote sex scenes went...
See, you're talking to someone who, like many other Americans, especially American males, the only way as a child you could gain access to something that resembled a boobie without having Cinemax or without knowing how to access the Playboy channel is having a subscription to National Geographic magazine, right? It was the only way you could understand it was through tribes people. Right? Through an artistic...
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? And,
absolutely.
And then beyond that, it was, oof, we're not looking at that.
Yeah. Ours was through the French or the Germans. That was our point of access.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or the Sun newspaper, Total Rag, with the page 3 girls.
Yeah.
Right? Which, deeply, deeply problematic. But that's... for us in the 80s, where you would see a boob or two.
Yeah.
They often come in pairs, I've noticed. I'm not a biologist, but I've noticed pairs.
Because we have listeners on other planets, they may come in threes.
If a listener on another planet wanted to partake in our Triple M with Chanel, how would they go about doing it? And I ask that as somebody who doesn't know how to access it.
if someone wanted to start listening to Mates, Movies, and Malts, which is 3M, that is the thing, Mates, Movies, and Malts, you can find the podcast. Now, this is one of those Patreon podcasts, right? So you've got I think it's basically $3 a month, right? So we release an episode once per month. We focus on a movie, and the listener gets the opportunity. Well, they should either own the movie or stream it, somewhere. And you press play on the movie when we tell you to press play, and we're all watching it together, and we're all talking about the movie together, right? That's the premise. You get to sit down and have a drink with us and enjoy the podcast with us. So if you're interested in doing that, you can go to Patreon, Patron, .podbean.com/matesmoviesmalts.
Excellent.
So, patron.podbean.com/matesmoviesandmalts. And what is it, the 8th month? So we have 8 episodes so far, and we'll have 4 more to go before the year is out. So there you go.
Yeah. Tons of fun with Nelly. I just think that one was so much fun, and I think heightened by the fact that we hadn't seen the movie before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was great seeing Prince, too. He was just awesome in that movie.
Well, and the other thing I would say, for anybody throwing $3 at that, you're not going to get shortchanged. You're going to get more minutes than you know what to do with for $3.
That's very true. That is very. This is a Joshua and Jason and Joshua podcast. So you're gonna, like Dr. Matt,
and
you
two can see where Prince puts his hands.
All right, Jason. It has been real. It's been really real.
It has. It's been lovely spending time with you, and lovely, as always, spending time with the listeners. Cheers to all.
Cheers to all. And l'chaim.
Slange l'chaim.
It's l'chaim. L'chaim.
It's a pandemic, though. You don't want to project that too far.
You know what?
Let me get my mask.
I'm an expert editor, so if you want to go and grab that earbud, go ahead. The listeners will never know, except in an Easter egg that I deliver at the end of this episode.
It's on the other side of the room.
Or also at the bit where my doorbell just rang, yeah. Even though I've got a notice that says recording, please do not ring doorbell.
But now that delivery person has left his or her mark on this podcast in the form of a ding dong. Ding dong.